Yesterday was a bad day for music. Now, I think we're very fortunate on this channel to have a community that's largely harmonious and in kind of general agreement. We get the odd grumpy person, but that's absolutely fine. Now, this next video, I suspect, may be somewhat more divisive, and I really welcome discussion about this because it's a tricky one. Why yesterday was a bad day for music was it kind of supports a theory that I've been developing and a fear that I've been harbouring. The biggest threat to the business of making money from music is the music business. The biggest threat to publishing is publishers. The biggest threat to our industry is the industry itself. That is where the existential threat lies, not from outside, but from within. I am, of course, talking about the legal case that won in the favour of Christian rapper Flame against Katy Perry and her co-writers of the track Dark Horse. There's other YouTubers who have already talked about this. Check out Rick Beato's video. There's a really good grounding in what this is all about. Because what yesterday's decision confirms in my mind is a paranoia that I've been harbouring, that the legal profession is gaming our industry, that basically our art form is being deforested at an alarming rate. Inaugural journey of the new Azuma train on the Flying Scotsman service. There's one thing you can always expect from the Scottish is a set of pipes. For any reason. To justify my somewhat paranoid claims and sit down and write a script for this monologue. I won't dwell on this particular claim. I'm very much Camp Beato on this. Do check out his video. However, I have witnessed firsthand the effects that the theft of music IP can reap on its victims. Imagine someone commits a crime against you and they get away with it, and from that moment forth, every shop you pass, every bar you drink in, every car window that goes down, every time you switch on the radio or the TV, there's a chance that that criminal will be there reminding you of his or her heinous act. And the more you see or hear that criminal, the more synchronizations you witness, you know that your assailant is getting richer. Thanks very much. It's funny because this was the inaugural journey of the Flying Scotsman on this new Azuma train. The whole train is packed to the gunnels with vloggers, so this is the only time I've ever, okay, thank you. This is the only time I've ever felt comfortable about vlogging away. Little do they know I'm not vlogging about trains. I think there are only three types of music makers who are capable of these dastardly acts. Thieves, charlatans, but also people who quite genuinely are ignorant of what it is to truly compose. You know, to come up with something from scratch, from the ether, from your personal heritage, to be influenced by it, but not to rob it blind. Your record bag, your CD collection, your streaming playlist contains the works of artists you respect, admire, you study, your heroes. Why then would you think it appropriate to rob them blind?
There you go, keep the good fight going.
Thank you. That was a bit of a moment. This nice gentleman here drove me up from King's Cross. I said, Tileyard Road, never heard of it. He said, but is it near Spitfire House? We're a landmark. I know I'm kind of repeating myself here, but talking about people who really don't know what it is to experience the act of composition. That case, those two DJs, or producers rather, got a singer to sing a melody they hadn't written on top of a track that they hadn't composed. This was then, it was about 10 years ago, this was then synced on about 800 different major adverts. People who wrote the actual track got a really tiny micro point, and the singer only got recognised as a co-writer about a couple of years ago. From what I can ascertain, one of those producers was simply ignorant to what it is to compose. Composing isn't taking wholesale two things that you haven't written and put them together. That is production, it's curation. But the other guy, interestingly, on this same album, is credited as the lyricist for a song that was sampled that actually is a traditional slave song from America. I would say he falls into the category of a raging thief with a karma debt that I don't envy. You know, the Claire Torrey case is a prime example of how fellow composers, our heroes, are people who can act like total fuckwits. I mean, why did they have to go through that hell in order to recognise that you didn't write the top line, she improvised it, therefore wrote the thing that people hum? Just credit her and pay her. So it's only right that the brave and determined have sued people's arses, but something changed. As far as I can see, something weird started happening. People started winning these lawsuits rightfully, but the artists didn't get their compensation. A great example is there was this huge sweep of retrospective lawsuits against hip-hop makers of the 80s and 90s, people who created tracks out of stuff by James Brown and George Clinton. It was easy to prove that these tracks were in breach of copyright. But it wasn't easy for George Clinton or James Brown to prove who had come up with the bass line that had been sampled, the drum beat, the keyboard riff. As a consequence, this money never made it back to the people who'd been ripped off. And this is what led to us being in what I believe to be a bit of a gold rush for lawyers, publishers, labels. The deforestation of our craft, pitching one hungry musician against another, and the opportunism. Only this year, Richard Ashcroft has finally settled him being totally ripped off by two of the most successful, affluent and admired songwriters this country has ever produced, who saw an opportunity, or whose representatives saw an opportunity to asset strip the verve of Bittersweet Symphony because of an error that was made in a sample clearance matter regarding the Rolling Stones. Going back to that thing I described, you know, that threat of, you know, being reminded about a crime that's been committed against you. Can you imagine if that echo that you had created, that trauma, was Bittersweet Symphony? Anytime you switch on the box, go out, there's such a distinct possibility that you will be reminded of that injustice. Mick and Keith, what were you thinking? Oh, I'll teach him for using one of these newfangled sampling machines. Was there never a point in the Rolling Stones' history where possibly they may have borrowed a blues riff from the American songbook? I think you rarely see some of those blues artists or their estates coming after Keith and Mick going, satisfaction, we'll have that, thank you very much. But back to Katy and Flame. See, what's happening with them is they're being used as human shields behind legal teams, publishers and labels who are staking claims that no one has the right to stake. And what disturbs me most about it is it simply stands in the face of what music actually is. So when we learn music, 9 times out of 10, we tend to learn it from a teacher. You don't get a clarinetist teaching his students and going, hang on a minute, that's my embouchure, you can't copy it, it's mine. IP. Music is a narrative that has been passed through generations for eons. Banged, blown, strummed, struck, sung. We're here today not because of some innate ability to create banging drum and bass. This is the result of an evolution of us passing a tradition from one set of people to the next. We learn from what people have done. We study what they do. We are influenced by those studies, and we celebrate and appreciate the work and the adventuring and the exploration that our forebears have done in order for us to express ourselves in the way that we do today. It is totally dependent on other people's work. And without us continuing to learn, continuing to allow ourselves to be influenced and to take those influences and other parts of our own personal heritage to create something new, our industry, our art, our craft, it stagnates. I was trying to educate myself on the great classical composers not many years ago actually, and Ben Valfish said to me, you've got to check out Beethoven. And I said, why? And he said, because Christian, it is joy. And there was a philosopher who said, you don't look at your children and extract pleasure. You look at your children and extract joy. Joy is love. Music is joy. Music is love. And that's what I hate about what happened. Well, it's now the day before yesterday. It's just
the antithesis of that, the antithesis of sharing, of passing on knowledge earned that has been passed on to you through generations. The very act of coming together to make music is an act of love. This is born of greed, opportunism, of a disregard for our craft, a disregard for this ancient relay race that we're a part of, for want of a better description. I always say, beware the unloved, because they have an unloved or an unloving view of the world. Taking and following the advice of people who have this view, where the success and status of a human being can be based on their material and fiscal gains and not the love they have earned or given, I think is a seriously unwise thing. And for me, it feels like the lawyers, the publishers, the labels, particularly in this moment of flux with our industry, this moment of extreme opportunity where there are more points of sale by an order of magnitude than there have ever been for music, during this important, crucial time of change, I feel they have a stranglehold. It's their interests, their unloved and unloving interests, that seem to be, or appear to me to be, at the heart of our industry. Our world is a beautiful, I'm not going to do a Swiss turn here, a beautiful landscape with meadows and woods and mountain ranges and running streams and orchards and fields full of grass and crops and things that we use to create our creations. And it's as if someone said to someone, you should go up to the orchard and what you need for this is some apples. And they've gone and they've returned empty-handed, and we've all gone, well, what's happened there? And they've gone, well, I couldn't get any apples. And everyone's gone, well, why? And they go, well, someone's erected a barbed wire fence around the orchard, and apparently we're not allowed to use those anymore.
The difference between what is being influenced by and what is simply copying or thieving is a difficult thing to define. I don't like the word subjective because that implies you have to get some expert on board. It's a human definition for me. The truth lies in the heart of the person who has created the offending or not offending piece of IP. If only we could have a kind of a council of musicians who could come together and come to an agreement with each other. I would simply say, if you feel nervous about what you've done, with a piece of work, then simply reach out to that artist and say, listen, I feel I may have been overtly influenced by you and would like to credit you. To go after people with your wolves and your dogs is just unmusician-like. I have a friend, I was talking to him yesterday, some lawyers came after him for something he simply couldn't have copied because he never heard this piece of music. And he said, what was the biggest shame? It was another musician who'd got straight onto his lawyer. He said, I would never do that to a fellow musician. And sure, if I felt that someone had ripped me off, I would possibly reach out to them direct, something that's very easy to do in this day and age. This is a human sensation, and if you do feel that you've copied someone, or if you do feel you've co-written with someone, just for God's sake, credit them appropriately and compensate them appropriately. If you really don't want to write with other people, or want other people to stake a claim over publishing rights, that kind of stuff, don't write with people in the room. Present them with exactly what you want them to do and allow them to interpret that as any performer does. I'm getting paranoid. I'm starting to sound a bit kind of preachy, and that's not what I want to be at all. I'm just voicing my humble opinion. This is, as I said at the beginning, just a kicking off point for discussion. I don't speak for the industry. I don't speak for our sorority and fraternity of musicians. These are my wants, hopes and ambitions. Do you think the day yesterday, or the day before yesterday, was a bad day for music? And how do you think we can buck this trend of preventing influence from becoming a commodity? I know so many people who don't want to kind of practice music anymore or get back into music because they just don't want to get sued if they become successful. It's so counterintuitive. In this age of troll culture, it's all very much grow a pair, or success is defined by how many lawsuits you have against you. And what I fear is our generation, what we've added and contributed to the music continuum that was handed to us from our forebears, we won't be able to give that inheritance to the meek. I'm currently listening to podcasts and on a daily basis see how music is actually haunting people. Switch that off, it's got music on, we'll get taken down, demonetized. There is a genuine sense amongst the creator community that the use of music is a true and real danger. It's just like that whole Napster thing. Once you allow an entire generation to become the royalty-free generation, that becomes, well, historically it's proven to, becomes a trend that's very difficult to reverse. Retain our royalties, retain our rights, absolutely, but we need to bring the world on side with us, because the world won't wait for long. And I watch, the efforts of Rick Beato going to great lengths to educate people and celebrate the success of fellow musicians, only to have his efforts totally asset stripped by overeager publishers and their lawyers, by aggressively, punitively punishing people who celebrate our work. We create a fertile breeding ground for the more acidic parts of our industry. People who are proper crooks, people who are proper thieves, people who are opportunistically filling the vacuum that we are willingly or unwittingly creating. I don't want to focus in on any particulars here, but believe you me, as part of the Spitfire experiences, as part of being a composer, as being a YouTuber, I have looked into these companies, and what I find, it's a very, very maggoty chest of horrors. We are creating a ripe breeding ground as we deforest our own rich rainforests and all of the wonderful gems that we've yet to find within, all of that potential there. As we deforest that, we turn our profession over to the hands of, I don't know, the equivalent in kind of modern industrial agriculture techniques in America. The same will happen with music if we're not careful. I don't fear for music. Music is innate in all of us, but I do fear for the ability for us to earn a living out of music, because it is that great, noble enterprise that has got us to where we are here today. And there's a responsibility that we have too. This is our watch. As I mentioned before, we're part of a continuum. This isn't like something that we've created. This relay race goes back through the ages, and do you want to hand, it's not like when George W. Bush came into power and they took all the W's off the typewriter, or indeed when Obama got in and they just basically went, we spent all the money. We have a responsibility to hand back or hand forward an industry, a craft, an art form, a narrative that is intact, not broken, not deforested. Do you want the subjective, and it is, the subjective argument of whether that is an influence or whether that is theft, to be governed by lawyers who have a vested interest in proving the most negative aspects of that? Do you want musicologists over and above composers to define what is plagiarism and what is simply part of the narrative that we are defining and should define? I'm absolutely dreading editing this film. I've got, so far, 2 hours and 40 minutes of footage. Apologies in advance. Thanks as always for your patience. If you haven't subscribed yet, please do. But the most important thing is this is me just kicking off a conversation that I think we really, really need to have. On one hand, we need to protect our rights. On the other hand, we need to not go to war with each other. And most of all, we mustn't scare people who want to celebrate and congratulate and promote what we do. If you want to be notified the next time I put up a video, ding that bell, and one of those for our forebears, because without them and the fight they've fought on our behalf, we wouldn't be in the position we are today. I think music is the freest form of expression on the planet today, and it's because of what people before us have done that it's create this freedom. Let us not erect barbed wire fences, and let us welcome people in the paradise that is music. So cheesy, but so true, and it's why you and I are here today talking to each other, because music is joy, joy is love. See you next time.